أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Dr. Suzy Ismail from Cornerstone. I'm happy to be with you on this journey of Ramadan resilience. As we continue through the last 10 nights of Ramadan and we continue to seek out that connection with Allah, that forgiveness of Allah, we also want to continue to seek out understanding. We've talked a lot about mental and emotional well-being. We've talked also about anxiety and depression, sadness and sorrow and grief. But today we want to dive a little bit deeper into some of the mental health struggles that are illnesses that can really impact our functionality, that we need to better understand. Many of you may be familiar with some terms like OCD or BPD, BPD1, BPD2. Maybe they're terms that you've heard, but you don't fully understand how it impacts you or impacts those that you love. When we look at OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder, we see that it is an ailment and an illness that can be born of trauma. It can be born of facing very difficult circumstances and not healing from that trauma. So for example, if we look around at the world around us today, we see that just recently, a few months back, at the end of August, beginning of September, we saw many individuals, muhajirin, refugees, who were forced migrants from their homes in Afghanistan, leaving and entering into other countries, safe havens, and starting the process of resettlement. Just a few years back, we saw many of our Syrian brothers and sisters leaving their homes, entering into refugee camps, going through the process of resettlement and experiencing grief and loss and severe trauma. Currently, we're watching the news and we see the trauma that's coming out of the Ukraine with so many refugees escaping the country, leaving their homes. We saw it occur in Iraq, we saw it occur in Bosnia, and we see consistently the impact of war, of poverty, of crises, and how that war, poverty, and crises can cause trauma. Oftentimes we see that trauma showing up as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. We see it showing up as OCD. We see it sometimes as BPD. So what are all these letters? What do they mean? So I mentioned OCD being obsessive compulsive disorder, which is a way of trying to deal with trauma through repetitive movements. Now, there is a specific type of OCD that we tend to see frequently among the Muslim community, which is an OCD that's known as scrupulosity. Scrupulosity is a disease in which religious ritual becomes perpetuated. So someone who, for example, is making wudu, and they make it once, and then they make it again, and then they make it another time, and then another time. Somebody who stands to pray and is constantly repeating a verse over and over and over again. Somebody who is consistently in prostration, somebody who reads the Quran, but in a way where it becomes obsessive. And OCD doesn't have to exist just in action, it can also exist in thought. So if you have a thought that is repetitive, something that you can't let go of, that you constantly come back to, it might be a form of paranoia, it might be something that's constantly in the back of your mind. This could be an OCD thought pattern. Many times when someone has OCD, we'll immediately go to the place of saying, well, it's a jinn, or it's hasad, it's ayn, it's, and yes, some of these aspects may actually exist, and we're not going to deny the existence of the possibility of hasad, the possibility of jinn, the possibility of things that are of an Islamic nature that are impacting the wellness of an individual. But that also doesn't mean that we deny the disease itself. So OCD is a disease and it is treatable, it is manageable. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is also something that is manageable. BPD, bipolar disorder, and there's BPD1, BPD2, where you might have manic depressive responses, or you may have a BPD that is it kind of exhibits itself in different ways. Borderline personality disorder. All of these diagnoses differ from what we talked about in terms of depression and anxiety because they are often clinically diagnosed, right? Whereas we see people self-diagnosing sometimes when it comes to anxiety and depression. But they are illnesses, and they are treatable, and they are manageable, but we need to identify them. We need to recognize that something is wrong. So if someone is exhibiting an OCD behavior, we don't want to just dismiss it and say, oh, it's great, this person just really wants to be clean, that's why they keep making wudu. No, there's probably some sort of trauma behind it. And we often see scrupulosity being exhibited by many of our refugee clients that we serve because of the trauma they've experienced in forced migration, and it may manifest itself in OCD behaviors. Don't ignore it. Identify it. Be aware of it. Don't stigmatize it. So many people among us that may struggle with bipolar disorder and are highly functioning and are able to continue and move forward and are able to live enriching, fulfilled lives, but we have to manage it and we have to treat it. So I hope that you can continue in these last few nights of Ramadan to continue watching iTVusa, where we'll keep diving into these topics, important topics that we need to talk about as a community. So I'm excited to see you there. Jazakumullahu khair. Assalamu alaikum.